Hi, I'm John Paul, and a really warm welcome back to my channel. Today, I'm going to be continuing with conversations with therapists about career change and being a therapist as well, and particularly focusing on the kind of challenges of being a therapist, but also the benefits, so the kind of pros and cons of being a therapist. And today, I'm absolutely delighted to have with me Mike Toller. Thank you so much for coming on, Mike.
Thanks for having me, John Paul.
Well, I saw you a little bit on LinkedIn as well, but there was an article which in Therapy Today
hmm
about portfolio careers and the
hmm
ways that people have developed their careers over time. And I read about you in there, and also the clinical will, which I think will come onto the app that you've come up with, that we'll come on
Yeah.
to talk about a little bit. But also, I understand that you're a therapist, but also a therapeutic coach as well. So it might be interesting to cover that from the point of view of how the career is set up. Could you sort of introduce yourself and give a bit of a background, and then also just say how you came into the career?
Yeah, well, I think you've already introduced me, I guess, correctly. I work as a psychodynamic psychotherapist, if we want to be really specific.
Mhm.
I do a fair bit of coaching as well. We can talk maybe about the therapeutic coaching bit a bit later, but I see those two things as really distinct, even if there are commonalities. That's the sort of the mainstay of what I do these days. I've been working in private practice in both of those kind of approaches for something like 7, 8 years.
Okay.
And then obviously did a training before that and was doing very different things before that. And maybe we can come to the way I kind of decided to make a career change and ended up working both as a therapist and a coach. And the final bit, which you've also just mentioned there, is more recently I've, I guess, developed an interest in relation to my own practice because it was something I needed to do in clinical wills,
Hmm.
and that then led to me to develop the app that you mentioned just there. So that's something I'm doing kind of alongside coaching and psychotherapy work now, but is I think is I'm doing more of because that there's more to do there, and the app is kind of becoming more well known and used. So there's just more to do there in all sorts of ways. So it's kind of two and a half stroke three things that I'm doing now if we're thinking about portfolio careers, which is obviously what you read about in the article that you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. And just going back to sort of how you started, what were you doing before?
So I worked in publishing for a while in my 20s, very briefly in recruitment before that, then publishing. I'd always been in bands and had played music, and then at one point I ended up running club nights, which became a business with an old business partner of mine. So I spent quite a lot of time running a music events management company as well for about 10 years, which was the first time that I'd really sort of got involved in running a business of my own, which was a very important experience for me. But during that time, I also realized that the thing I was doing, which was, sort of putting on gigs and club nights, wasn't for me long term. And so this was about, what was it, probably coming on for, I don't know, 15 plus years ago. Started thinking very carefully about what I wanted to do with what I was thinking at the time as the second half of my working life. So coming up to 40, I'm in my mid 40s now. So in a sort of unhurried way, started looking ahead and thinking very carefully about what I wanted to do long term. And then in relation to some experience of, mental health problems, particularly depression in my own family and a couple of depressive episodes I'd had myself in my 20s, really interested in mental health. And I did a lot of reading and I got some sort of informal, I guess, coaching and guidance and just started exploring and then realized that I was really interested in the idea of working as a counselor or a psychotherapist. So started kind of exploring that more formally through doing some intro courses and then, just sort of followed my nose, if you like, into that and just sort of checking all the way whether how I felt about doing that potentially as a career. But the more I did it, the more confident I became and the more into the idea I became, and then ultimately did a training to the point where I really got serious about working as a psychotherapist and doing the training and then the placement. Coaching came along a little bit later alongside that.
So intro courses, what kind of things were you doing? Because some people, the commitment of starting a foundation course or something for a year is quite a lot for people. From your point of view, you just did kind of online courses, or was it?
It was an in-person, it was a year long, I mean, very, very part-time. I think it was an evening or a morning a week, the first one I did. That was at Birkbeck, where I went on to do my training. The first year became a second year, so you could sort of extend it, but it wasn't a 2-year course. It was a course you could go on to sort of extend. And again, sort of part-time at that point. So it was, it was a meaningful thing to do. It was a sort of, quite a big commitment, but it worked really well around, the work commitments I had at the time.
Mm.
And it wasn't sort of too much to take on, but it definitely got me thinking and, kind of really got me into a space where I was starting to sort of talk to people, I guess in a sort of helping relational kind of way, like on the course. And I went on to do some voluntary work as well, as a result of doing that course. So I guess it sort of slowly brought me into the field in a way that helped me to understand what the work might be like.
Hmm. And all the time, were you still doing your kind of day job?
Yeah, so still running the events management company and working, that work involved a lot of nighttime and weekend work, which was also part of my thinking at the time that thinking ahead to potentially starting a family, I realized that doing that work wouldn't work for me, long term. So again, I was also thinking about, I guess, the kind of the way my work would sort of fit into my life more broadly, given some of the changes I was sort of looking ahead to.
Was that an integrative course?
So the training I went on to do was a 3-year training in psychodynamic counseling and psychotherapy.
Okay, 3 years.
Mhm.
Psychodynamic, again, it's another question that people have a lot of when they're coming into the profession, deciding on their training is what kind of modality
Mhm.
that they would choose. From your point of view, just out of interest, why did you choose psychodynamic?
That's a really good question. Because I looked at a few training programs. There's an integrative training I considered at the Minster Centre, which I know
Mhm.
is a really good training. And in between the intro courses I did at Birkbeck and then starting the 3-year training, I did couple of modules at a college called the NSPC, which is an existential
Okay.
training that they offer, which I was just really interested in existential philosophy and how that would be applied in in counseling or psychotherapy. I really enjoyed that too. So it wasn't that I was on the fence, but I was definitely open. I'm sort of open to the fact that, there are different modalities and that in a way they all have their value, and did a lot of reading around person-centered approaches. And I don't know, in a way, I sort of feel a real affinity with the person-centered approaches because I think they're really just, about sort of solid foundational principles that apply in any approach to working with people. It's about,
Mm.
congruence and not being judgmental and being authentic. And I think that those are sort of part of the course when working in any modality.
Yeah.
To answer your question, I guess I was really I read around lots of the sort of the modalities, and there's something about the psychodynamic approach which I really like. I mean, partly because it's a post-Freudian approach, and Freud was in a way the person who started all of this, if we sort of think about it in those terms. So I thought it was important to know something about Freud and the way he kind of thought about psyches and experience and development and the way we kind of relate in the world. And maybe the more I read about it, the more I realized that there was something there that was really interesting to find out more about, and went on to sort of experience on the intro course I did, and then really liked and sort of wanted to do more of, I guess.
The training generally, how did you find it? I mean, we're going to talk about the kind of pros and cons of being a therapist, but
Yeah,
what about the pros and cons of training?
yeah. I mean, fundamentally a really rewarding experience in so many ways, personally and ultimately professionally, because I've decided to go on and work psychodynamically, which I love doing.
Hmm.
It's a really rich and like not easy, but a really rich theory, the psychodynamic psychoanalytic theory. And there's a huge body of work, and not, I mean, obviously not just Freud, but everyone who comes
Yeah.
after him. We focused on Klein and Winnicott and lots of others, and carrying on sort of beyond the training, still very interested in what all sorts of people have to say, but maybe, and particularly in the kind of psychoanalytic tradition, there's a lot of interesting thinking going on in terms of where neuroscience and psychoanalytic thought meets. Neuroscience is, as you're saying, it's a real thing, and there are neuroscientists finding out all sorts of things about the
Yeah.
brain that we didn't know before, and there are people who are thinking about that in relation to, whether it's trauma and other approaches, but within the psychoanalytic field, just how what we know from neuroscience links up with, I guess, more classical psychoanalytic ideas. And that it's a very really sort of very fertile
Mm.
area. I'd encourage people to go and find out more. There's a man called Mark Soames, who is which is spelled Solms, who
Okay.
writes a lot of really interesting stuff and is really kind of at the forefront of a neuropsychoanalytic approach, as he calls
Mhm.
it. So
Okay.
there's a lot there to kind of find out about, and I think it's certainly for me, it's really informed my practice. So this kind of sense of ongoing learning rather than just having done something in my training which I then sort of take out and use. It's a process that's ongoing, and there's always more to learn, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. And it's another thing that would come up in other conversations is that, I mean, for me, the kind of model that I would use in some ways that wasn't taught on my course, actually. It's just
Mhm.
we have to, of course, do these and would want to anyway, continuing professional development afterwards. So it's always a constant process, really, of learning and developing, isn't it? And new things come through, don't they? In my case, qualifying was 12 years ago now.
Right.
So the development and the number of things probably didn't even exist
Yeah,
then that would be around now.
I
Yeah.
think it's really important. I think it's really it's heartening that there's new thinking going on, and people obviously actively thinking about how we apply new perspectives and sort of new findings. And I see CPD as an opportunity rather than as sort of something to have to tick off. I mean,
Mm.
I've gone and done CPT and all sorts of different things. I did a really interesting training in polyvagal theory a couple of years ago, which I don't sort of use directly, but was really a kind of really eye-opening perspective. And I think I see it as an opportunity to learn new things and then sort of to consider them and think about how they relate to my work. And I think you also made a really important point there, which is that there may be modalities that we can point to, but we all develop individually as practitioners
Yeah.
and sort of take bits and pieces and integrate them. But also we develop as people, and every session spent with the client deepens our experience and broadens our experience, and
Yeah,
we bring that in as well. So we're forever kind of updating how we work with people,
definitely.
and it's a
Yeah.
really important thing that we do, I think.
Sort of shaped by every relationship that we have, and that includes
Yeah,
relationships with clients, doesn't it?
yeah.
So generally, it was very rewarding. Anything you found particularly challenging?
Yeah, so on the training I did, there was a lot of as well as the theoretical and sort of work on case studies and understanding those. There was also a lot of work on us as people, so a lot of experiential stuff in sort of smaller groups and bigger groups, and that wasn't always easy. And I think it was, I guess, a way of understanding what happens when people come together and dynamics and the way that unconscious processes, particularly if we're thinking psychodynamically or analytically, there are parts of us that we don't necessarily have access to or don't fully understand, but they mean something in terms of how we feel and behave and react, particularly in relation to others. And there was an opportunity to I guess explore that, and that wasn't always easy because when you put people in a room and you start talking about important things, stuff happens, right? And
Yeah,
it's not always easy. It can stir up all sorts of feelings, often difficult ones. So there was that part of it, but again, I think ultimately that was part of what made it so rewarding, that it was something we had to invest in personally. It wasn't just a kind of exercise in learning something sort of theoretical. It was really about learning something about ourselves, both on the training and then obviously in the therapy that
yeah.
I did sort of before and during and ultimately after as well.
hmm So I guess you knew during it. Did you start to become firmer that that was what you wanted to do when you qualified to continue and have a
Yeah,
private practice? Was that always in mind for
I
you?
think so. I mean, I think given that I'd sort of fallen into things before that in terms of my career, I was careful to be quite intentional. I really didn't want to rush anything. And, in a way, the fact that training, can take a long time, from the point where you start doing intro courses to the point where you're kind of, through a training and, having done a placement and then finally ready to, to start in private practice. That's quite a long time. And I think that was a good thing because it gave me the time to really think about whether I wanted to do it. I sort of
Yeah.
hadn't committed myself to doing anything. I was just, I guess observing, exploring, reflecting my experience as I went, and then, sort of making decisions as I went about, whether to carry on and if so, how I might carry on. But there was a point where I think I knew I was ready to commit to working towards a career as a private practitioner. I think at that point I also realized that it wasn't maybe going to happen as quickly as I might have wanted it to, and that's sort of the point where I discovered coaching and did a coaching training and realized that it was something I was going to be able to do sooner in terms of
Mhm.
private work, which I
Yeah.
needed to because at some point I realized I needed to earn some money as well, and doing a training is expensive and takes up time, and you can't just sort of step into private practice quickly. So I did a coaching training and started that work while I was training to work as a psychotherapist,
Hmm.
and sort of built that, I guess, built that business up alongside what then became my private practice as a therapist.
So you did a coaching training whilst you were doing your therapy?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that
Okay.
as well. So I was at that point, I finished doing working in the events management business. So I had more time, and I was able to do a coaching training, and then sort of start doing that work immediately and with
Okay.
paying clients.
How long was the coaching training that you did?
That was about a year. It's a sort of
Okay.
whole other story, but I was put in touch with someone I had been at uni with, but didn't know very well at uni, who worked as a coach, and he and I ended up. He was ready to train other coaches, and I helped him to do that. And as part of that, he trained me, and I helped him to run a coaching training um, organization for a bit, which was great because I got to know loads of great people through that, and helped to train some coaches, and sort of still, some of whom I still work with and I'm very much in
Okay.
contact with.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, but found that work really, interesting and sort of challenging and rewarding in its own way, as well as being, a way to start earning an income much quicker.
Going back, you said at some point you realized you may not be able to set up, was it a therapy practice to
Mhm.
earn money as quickly as you might like? I wonder from your point of view, what was it that made you think, okay, I'm going to have to, maybe, I mean, you probably wanted to as well, do the coaching too, but was it messages about how difficult it might be financially, or how many clients you might need and how long that might take?
I think it was more to do with me feeling ready. I mean, I did a placement at a student counselling service, and that was a really good, I mean, obviously an important part of my training. It's something I had to do, but then I decided to carry on working there for a bit as an honorary while I guess, built my experience and built my confidence.
Mm.
I think I also, if I remember rightly, I was working towards my accreditation and sort of looking with the BACP, looking to that as something that I wanted to be well on my way to before I started working so privately. So maybe it was sort of more to do with me feeling confident that I was ready to and competent as well.
Okay.
Um, I can't remember the exact chronology, but it was probably a year and a half after I finished my the training itself that I, was ready to kind of set up in private practice.
Okay.
Um,
And how did you do that? Where did clients come from, that kind of thing, if people are thinking about that now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I found a room. So I still work in central London. It was where I first worked was a little bit further into London. I now work in Liverpool Street near the city, near Shoreditch, and initially it was near Farringdon. So I found a room that would work for me. I found a supervisor. I started thinking about all those kind of the practical side of things, whether it's agreements or a website and all that kind of stuff. Put myself on some directories as well. And yeah, I think the other bit in terms of it taking longer was, even when I'd sort of opened my doors, as it were, it's not like a client's necessarily sort of, come flooding through the doors. So I think, it can take a while to find clients and to make sure you're working with the right people and to build a practice. So again, even when I was ready to start working in private practice, it didn't mean that all the time I had available was suddenly full with clients. It took some time to kind of build up a practice. And I've really noticed that I started with a handful, and slowly over time it's grown to the point where I'm at now, which is where I've probably got enough clients,
Mm.
and even refer clients on if I don't have either the capacity in terms of the time or the capacity, sort of mental capacity to take on more clients. So
Right.
that's just taken a while, and it works for me now in terms of it being financially sustainable, but back then it wouldn't have been. So again, I needed that kind of coaching work alongside to just support myself financially, really. It just took longer to find enough therapy clients, I guess, sort of to fill up that half of my caseload.
Mhm.
I mean, just on a practical level, I think, as a coach, you can put yourself out there a bit more, and you can
Yeah.
obviously go looking for clients in your existing personal and professional networks, which is what I did. I worked really hard at that. And I know counselors and therapists find clients in all sort of sorts of different ways. But for me, it felt right to be on the directories and get referrals from colleagues rather than letting people I knew personally know that I was doing that work and looking for clients. Just in terms of
Sure,
sort of
sure.
thinking
Yeah,
about ethical practice.
yeah. So the directories were important in setting up your
Yeah.
practice. said the website as well, from the point of view of
Hmm.
kind of Google finding it and anybody looking. But
Hmm.
also, I suppose the directory is linked through to a website, which gives credibility and information, doesn't it?
That's
But you
right.
said a network. You're a network as well. So the importance of that, I guess,
Yeah.
is that of other therapists that you trained with.
Yeah,
Uh,
was
yeah,
so people I trained with, people I so the room I first worked in was it was part of a bigger organization that sadly isn't there anymore, called Still Point, which had a sort of a workspace and then therapists working, and there was a network there of people I'd bump into, and then people I'd not just trained with but worked with in the student counseling service who had sort of gone on to work in private practice, and
I see.
sort of feeling that you're part of a group of people who know about you and support you, and know that you're looking for clients and would sort of send people your way
Mm.
if they needed to refer on.
I think also you said when you were talking about it, did you say the right clients? Because
Yeah.
that was just going back to, we just had a quick conversation before I started recording this, and we were talking about setting up a private practice, and the message that's out there a lot for people is finding their niche, actually. I
Hmm.
suppose, and I can understand it, well, for two reasons. If there is something that particularly attracts somebody and they particularly enjoy right from the beginning, then it seems a great idea to focus on that, doesn't it? It helps with people's marketing. They can
Hmm.
gear things towards the person that they're talking to more, as far as perhaps their social media or how they write their website, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But I have said in other videos as well, it's not really something I've ever done. As far you can niche in terms of, say, communities or demographic, various different symptoms, so anxiety.
Hmm.
But you were saying that it wasn't something that you'd ever done specifically, is to niche.
Yeah, I think, in terms of a niche, it isn't something I've ever really thought about. It's something I've thought about more in my coaching work, because
Okay.
there are probably people I've worked with more. I mean, it's often about career, and that continues to be the case, rather than just being about sort of problems in someone's personal life or questions in someone's personal life. But in terms of my work as a therapist, it isn't something I've thought about. I mean, you're right. I've only ever worked in London. I tend to see people face to face largely.
Yeah.
I do work with some people based outside of London, and that then tends to be online if they can't travel in. But largely my clients are face to face, that which means they sort of live in and around not just London, but kind of the part of London I work in, mostly. I do charge fees, that I have to charge a certain fee to be able to afford a room, and
Mhm.
and also it's my income as well, so that determines, and to some extent, the fee I charge. And that will determine, again, to some extent, who then ends up working with me. But other than that, I think I don't really think about it in terms of there being a common thread, other than really thing you touched on before, which is about who I feel I'm qualified or competent to work with. There are definitely instances where someone's got in touch or someone's been referred to me where either the risk or the level of complexity in the case I feel is beyond me. And I think very carefully about ethical practice. And I
Mhm.
think it's something that maybe is quite hard to think about sometimes, in terms of when to not work with someone, particularly when people are
Yeah.
looking for clients, and they feel they're there to help people. And I think
Mhm.
I've really come to learn that an important way to think about how we help our clients is to bear in mind what we're qualified to do, and
Mm.
what we're experienced to do, and to know where, when we're not qualified or experienced enough, and then to know where to send people and how to do that properly.
Definitely. And I think, I mean, we may have a part two of this, or hopefully we are going
Yeah.
to looking at ethics and that kind of, again, on my course, I think people, I'm sure, would have said, if you might need to refer on if you don't
Mhm.
feel like you can work with somebody.
Mhm.
But there is that, how do you know, in some ways,
Yeah.
how do you tell? I mean, to me, I would say now it's what I would feel like, actually. I've
Yeah.
paid much more attention over time
Mhm.
to connecting mind and body and what it's like being with somebody,
Yeah.
and I would trust that much more now as well. I have
Yeah.
to say, we all have different levels of tolerances and kind of
Mm.
sensitivities, don't we? Do you mean as far as the subject matter or your experience there, or when you say about ethically who you would refer on?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's all sorts of different things. And just to your point, I think it's something now that I feel more intuitively, whereas before it was something I was maybe thinking about much more. I mean, obviously I still think about it, but or speak for myself, I think I've developed a sort of a sense of, what someone's bringing in and how they're thinking about themselves, and in a way, how they're thinking about maybe the kind of help they need. And maybe that's an important thing to say in terms of what's common to my clients. I work in once, as a once weekly, on a once weekly session basis. And I tend to work over the long term. So I don't offer a set number of sessions or, a shorter engagement. I start working with people on the basis that we're going to continue working together
Hmm.
over the longer term. So that's already something, you're reminding me that that's something I do. And,
Yeah.
I'm clear about that from the outset. And I know people, colleagues work in all sorts of different ways. Some offer, time limited engagements, and that's just not something that I do as a rule. But, in terms of, that sort of that feel for, who I should be working with and who I shouldn't. Um, yeah, I guess it's, to some extent it's about risk and, being confident that I can work with someone safely. And when there is a lot of risk indicated, like thinking very carefully about that. And, there are people in situations who need more intensive support than I can offer as a once weekly therapist or someone
Sure.
who's not in touch between sessions. So, if we're thinking about very complex or very serious mental health diagnoses, then that probably isn't something that I should be working with. So, that's obviously we work with people with issues relating to their mental health, but I think some people, some situations are sort of far more acute in terms of the support they need than I can offer. So it's kind of about making those sorts of calls. In terms of, the things that are going on for someone or the things that have happened in their life, I don't think there's a sort of there's a rule as to yes to that and no to that. I mean, my clients come from all sorts of backgrounds and have had all sorts of experiences in their life. So I don't
Mm.
think I think in those terms. I think maybe where I start is, just as you say, getting a feel for how a potential client thinks about their life, their situation, how they're thinking about it, how they're talking about it, how they're thinking about the kind of help they need and how they might engage with that. And
Yeah.
then really thinking with them as well. I think that's an important part of an assessment, is thinking with the client about all of that and thinking with them about the kind of help they need and being clear about what I can offer and what I can't. And then, rather than sort of deciding it for them, talking to them about it and, exploring what the options might be and seeing how they feel about it. And then the last bit to really add, and I think this is something that, I've made use of supervision, obviously, as I've done my work, started my work and progressed. And then particularly in relation to assessments and deciding, who I should and shouldn't be working with, that's something I've really used supervision for, maybe
Yeah.
particularly early on, because when you're unsure, there are people around you who you can access for that kind of support. And supervision is, I think, a kind of a central pillar of that kind of support. Is kind of,
Yeah, coming on to the career and kind of the challenges and the
yeah,
benefits, the pros and cons.
yeah.
And one of the challenges, I've done a video on the challenges that I would experience. And one of those might be that there isn't necessarily a right or wrong
Mhm.
answer to things as such. Of course, we have our ethical guidelines, and there are some clear no's, so to speak, that 99 out of 100, or even 100 out of 100 therapists would probably say. But in terms of whether you see someone, what you do if there's continued lateness, or people
Mhm.
don't pay for a while, or what you do in a particular situation if somebody contacts you outside of
Mhm.
session,
Mhm.
all kinds of different things that you do. And to some degree, I think over time you have to trust yourself, as
Mhm.
well as, of course, have trustworthy people around you. But they
Yeah.
are also different, aren't
Mm.
they? Supervisor, as much as I would see things commonly, or have things in common with my supervisor and her worldview, actually,
Mm.
we're also different people. So how do you? It can be a challenge, I think, is that you can get three different answers if you're talking to if you're in a group of four therapists, as to what might happen in a situation.
I think you're right. And, outside of those, absolute no's that, we can sort of, go and find out about in all the ethical codes. I think you're right. It's about sort of feeling your way into your way of working and then, building your experience. And then, you might change over time as well. I mean, I'm sure there are things I do
Of
differently now
course.
in all sorts of ways than I did
Mm.
7, 8 years ago when I was starting out. And in some senses, my competence has grown. So maybe there's a wider kind of or a deeper level of complexity that I feel confident working with. But maybe in some ways I've there are things I don't do anymore as well. And just sort of I mean, all the way through, I've only ever worked on a once weekly basis, and I don't think I'm going to change that. That works really, really well for me. And I think the important thing is that, going back to supervision, that's happened because I've had the support. And, the support isn't a do or don't. It's let's think about this and let's
Mm.
think about it in relation to your training, your modality, your experience. and that there are differing views, but that, in my experience, certainly supervision is a space in which I can think together with someone else about the way I work or what's happening with a particular client. And then, ultimately it's then for me to kind of make a decision about, what I'm going to do, and to sort of in a way take up my authority and my experience as a practitioner, but maybe with more support earlier on when I was feeling less sure. And 7, 8 years down the line, that feels very different. But again, that sort of speaks to the fact that we grow as we do this, and
Mm.
we use supervision in a different way, and
Hmm.
sort of think about everything slightly differently
Yeah.
because of sort of the sum total of our experience.
Mm. Being a therapist now,
Yeah,
perhaps we could talk a bit about how things are set up practically. But
yeah.
before that,
Mm.
what do you enjoy about it, and also what do you find difficult about it?
Yeah, this is you sent me some questions before the call. This is the one that I liked the most and got me thinking the most, because it really goes to the heart of why I made the change at all. I think one of the things I was looking for in my working life that I didn't have, say 15 or so years ago, was doing something really meaningful. And this work really is meaningful. I'm working with people who have real problems and who are committed to addressing them, and they've come looking for some help. And in the case of my clients, I'm the person that they do that with, and it's a real privilege. It's not always easy, but it's really meaningful. I often think, or I often say to people, when I was a lot younger, I used to sort of want to change the world.
Right.
And it's a sort of on some level an ambition of mine. And I think I've come to realize that in a way, if you work with someone and um, help them, move forwards and change their life for the better, then in a way you've changed the world, because you've in a way
Mm.
you've helped to change one person's world.
Sure.
And that really is what I mean by doing meaningful work. It really matters, and we make a big difference in our clients' lives. And
Mm.
they don't always tell me that, but sometimes they do. And and it speaks to the fact that it's important work that we do. So I think that's one of the main thing, the first thing I would say in terms of what's rewarding about it.
Yeah.
I love working for myself. I really like that. It's not that, again, that's not always easy. I think you have to be careful not to become sort of isolated or even lonely in your work, because it's quite easy just to kind of be on your own. But I make sure that I'm in touch with colleagues formally and informally, and not just in terms of my clinical supervision, but part of peer supervision or more informal networks of colleagues, so that I don't feel like I'm on my own.
Hmm.
That's really important. But I'm in charge of my time, and that
Yeah.
suits me really, really well.
Do you miss anything about the kind of events management? What kind of events, what kind of music was it, by the way? You said you're in a band as well.
Yeah, I was in bands for a long time. So the music events, they were club nights. It was some corporate dues. It was working at festivals. Yeah. So, but just getting people together and giving them a good time, helping them have a good time, which was really good fun, but ultimately wasn't, I guess, meaningful enough for me.
Mm. So you
Um,
don't miss anything about it?
I mean, it was a bigger business in I guess in sort of in financial terms, and it was fun to do that, and managing people was a good challenge and was really rewarding in its own way.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think no, I'm very happy that I moved on, and I certainly don't miss the lifestyle, because there were a lot of late nights and a lot of sort of traveling, too much traveling around, which I don't miss really now.
Okay. Do you still play a musical instrument? Do you still?
I don't. Yeah, I've got a drum kit
So
stuck in
you
a
were a
cupboard,
drummer.
but I was a drummer, yeah, but I
Okay.
don't really get the chance. But I should get it set up in somewhere for my kids to play, because they'd probably love to have a
Okay.
thump about on it. But yeah,
I'm sure they would. Maybe you wouldn't
I was a drummer. Yeah.
welcome that though. But I'm saying that as well because I'm interviewing someone. He's a music therapist actually. And
Okay.
I'm interviewing him. He's gonna be in his studio by his piano and that kind of thing. So it's that idea as well. That I mean, I do talking therapy,
Yeah.
but there are these other things that very much complement therapy too. So art, music, and
Mm.
yeah, it just made me think about that with music being a big part of your life. There,
Yeah.
I just wondered whether it's still around.
Only in the sense that I listen to a lot of music,
Right.
and it's a really important part of my personal life, I guess. But yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'm not playing. But maybe I might get back there one day if
Yeah.
you know,
You
at
know,
some point where I have a bit more time.
okay. So challenges, what's
Mm.
challenging? I mean, you were talking a lot there about the amazing things that it's brought for you, but are there things that you found difficult or challenging and continue to about?
Yeah, I mean, look, apart from the risk of sort of being a bit isolated, and I think you have to work at that, not least because, it can sort of happen before you've noticed it. So I think you have to remind yourself that, you're maybe part of a bigger network of colleagues that are there and, for support informally or just, to sort of swap stories with, or, even just cross-referring. So, but I think another part of that is when you're on your own, you're responsible for everything, and there was a lot to learn. I mean, there's a lot to take in if you set up in private practice, and that can be overwhelming and worrying at times. I mean, getting into stuff like contracts and GDPR, and there's a lot there to think about, and it can be quite difficult to sort of find the right information and work out how it applies to you.
Mhm.
So that's been challenging at times, but you're also, you run your own business and you're responsible for your own income and marketing and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I tend to relish these things as opportunities to learn and do something new, but there have definitely been times when it's been quite scary as well.
Yes.
And I think that's often been when the support, particularly maybe peers, has been really useful. So, just making sure that, I'm talking to people about how I'm feeling and
Mm.
getting their advice, or just sharing my experience, and telling them that I'm freaking out about something. And I'm connected to people I trained with still, in various ways, mostly through sort of social media. And then I'm part of a peer supervision group. Some of in fact, I think all of them were on the same training as me, so we meet regularly. We discuss clinical stuff, but also just how we're doing as people who do this work. And then there's a wider group of therapists in East London, and we refer to each other, but sort of offer each other advice and support as well.
Mm.
So mainly through WhatsApp, but you meet people at conferences, or you meet for coffee sometimes as well. And I think you have to make that happen. You have to take responsibility for that, but it's well worth doing.
Yeah, something I've mentioned also as well. There is around here. There's something called SCPI, which is a collection of a group of therapists,
Mhm.
Surrey counsellors and psychotherapists
Okay.
initiative. It was about 35, 40 when I joined. There's about 20 now,
Okay.
but we would meet every other month on a Saturday just for a couple of hours for two reasons. There's the kind of CPD. Somebody will present something, so
Right.
it's useful for that. But I work in private practice as well at home, actually. So you're in, did you say in the city of London or Shoreditch or?
Yeah, just north of Liverpool Street. So there's a room there. I work there 2 days a week. And
Yeah.
there's, there are some people who work nearby who I see sometimes as well. And then,
Yes.
but online it's so easy as well to keep contact with people now, either in calls or in, just through messages.
Yeah, but it is.
Mhm.
I mean, it's something I would say on lots of things, and lots of therapists do, don't they? It is really important to keep those networks. But I think naturally they do happen as
Mhm.
well. And I also see on some social media, Facebook, if people say, "Oh, does anybody want to have a supervision group in Hull or something?" 25 people will say, "Yes, I do," because I
Mhm.
think a lot of people in private practice are find the same thing
Mhm.
and are looking for those sorts of connections because it
Yeah.
is a job of. I mean, there is the confidentiality side of things, isn't
Mhm.
there? It's walking into the kitchen and talking to a partner about clients is not something that we're able to do. So, and also it's a job which isn't necessarily like that many others as well. So,
Mhm.
to talk to other therapists about it
Yeah, I
is,
think I think you're right. In a way, it's quite a strange thing to do,
yeah,
and explaining what we do to people who haven't, say, gone through a training, or who aren't doing this work. It can be quite a difficult thing to do,
mm,
because it's not something. I mean, in terms of like my experience, it's not something I sort of switch on or off. I mean, I may not always be with a client, but I sort of I feel like I'm always a therapist, if that makes sense.
sure, yeah. Have
And
you diagnosed my attachment style already? So
no,
you are
no, I
not
don't
just,
mean
not
it
just
in
organised.
I don't mean it in those terms, but my clients are, I keep them in mind, for example. So it's not something I sort of leave at the office. And I'll find myself thinking about a client sometimes, and in relation to something that's going on for them or something that we've discussed. Like it's sort of, bubbling away there somewhere.
Yeah.
And I'm very aware of that. So it's not something that can be switched on.
No, no. So therapy, therapeutic coaching, and the
Yeah.
clinical will. So looking at how you set your week up now,
Yeah.
practically. Just say some more about that, and then talk about the app too, maybe.
Yeah, so it was sort of 50-50 in terms of my working week. I mean, firstly, I'll say, my working week is my own and I've got, young kids. So again, one of the sort of benefits of doing this work is that I've been able to set up my working week and also my working year because it means I can sort of think about holidays usefully in terms of, what my family needs.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I really love about this work too, that I'm in control of my time in that way.
Hmm.
But yeah, during my working week, I mean, I work roughly, I'd say 4.5 days a week, give or take. So I have some sort of take some time off to spend with my kids
Hmm.
outside of what you'd call a regular working day. But that's a little bit of a movable feast as well, so I can be a bit flexible. But yeah, on the sort of 4.5 days that I do regularly, it used to be sort of a straight 50-50 or thereabouts in terms of coaching and therapy kind of by hours, plus some time for, the admin around running both of those businesses.
Yeah.
And then increasingly now the Clinical Will app. So it's called clinicalwill.app is the URL if anybody's interested.
Hmm.
And that obviously has taken some time to conceive and develop and build. I've got a business partner I do that with, and now that it's up and running, we've got quite a few therapists using it now. So something like 500 therapists who are using it to you
Right.
know to set up and maintain their clinical wills, and that then inevitably means that there are problems that need solving or questions that people have, and we're also thinking about spreading the word. So with sort of doing some marketing and all that needs thinking about. So actually it's not 50-50 anymore between the therapy work and the coaching work I do, but it's I don't know the exact proportion, but the Clinical Will app is definitely becoming a really important part of my working week. So you're
Hmm.
going to have to think carefully about that, I think, in future, just to sort of make sure I give everything the time and attention it deserves.
Going towards the app, does it complement something as far as in the therapy work as well? What do you think you were looking for in that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, yeah, it does complement. I mean, firstly, it complements because it's quite different. And I wasn't looking to do something quite different. That it came about because I had to set up a clinical will of my own. Having been a member of the BACP, I joined the BPC, which is a smaller psychoanalytic membership organization. And they need you to show that you have a clinical will by telling them who your clinical trustees are. And it's something it was sort of always on my list, but it always been sort of pushed down my list. And it's
Mm.
something I've realized since, finding out more about clinical wills and developing the platform is that people are aware of clinical wills and what they are and why they should have one. But, it's sort of, there are usually more pressing concerns in terms of, the sort of the day-to-day or the week-to-week whether that's the client work or running the business. So it's something that often gets overlooked. And at that point, I couldn't overlook it. So I had to do it. And, that sort of one thing led to another. And I kind of discovered that there wasn't a good way for me to set up a clinical will. And I thought, this is the 21st century. And, there's usually a good kind of tech solution to a lot of problems that we face. So
Mhm.
is there something here that can be done? And it turns out there was. Um, but I guess the point I'm really making is that then led to sort of setting that up as a business. And it's, as you say, it's a very different kind of business. I mean, I'm in touch with some of our customers, but it's not like kind of, client work. And it's a different kind of thing that you're offering and ultimately selling as well. It needs to be thought about differently. And
Mhm.
I've really enjoyed that. So the first way it complements what I'm doing is that it's quite different. And I've really enjoyed that. I think it's sort of, if I've got a bit of an entrepreneurial itch that I carry around in me, I'm definitely scratching it by doing this because it's so different from the other work I do.
Sure.
Just different challenges, new things to learn. And, as you might have kind of realized, I really like learning new things and sort of engaging with new challenges in all sorts of ways. And this really gives me the opportunity to do that. And then I guess another way of answering that question is that it's really got me thinking about ethical practice, which ultimately complements my work as a therapist and a coach really well, because actually it's made me realize that there are ways I can tighten up my ethical practice, lots of ways. And in relation to sort of the Clinical Well app and the thinking I've done there, that's largely been focused on the practical side of things. So I think I've always, had a good handle on ethical practice in a clinical sense, and had lots of support in relation to that, either through you can do CPD or reading, or obviously the supervision that we mentioned. But I think the practical side of things like often gets overlooked. It's really got me thinking about where I store, records and, GDPR and things
Yeah.
like that. And the clinical will is kind of part of that and a really important part of that. But it doesn't stop there. There's a bigger, wider kind of set of questions around how we make sure we practice ethically. That's
Definitely. And it's that sort of container for it all, isn't it? It is I mean, most people would focus on the relational side of therapy, wouldn't they? And the relationship,
yeah,
that
yeah,
kind of thing. But there are important reasons why,
yeah,
because you mentioned a contract as well, and not
yeah,
everybody would necessarily have a contract at the beginning.
yeah.
Filling out an assessment form, I would speak to people who would say, I don't have an assessment. Somebody would just sit down and talk. And I quite liked all those things in place. And I still do, actually,
Hmm.
because to some degree, they kind of contain things, their boundaries. Help me to feel safe. They provide that sort of safety there as well. And of
Yeah.
course, in a clinical will example,
Hmm.
your app, if something were to, if there were to be a problem, somebody didn't have the will in place,
Yeah.
the ramifications of that for them, for their family, and also for their clients is
Absolutely.
huge, aren't they? So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that's exactly what having sort of identified that I needed a clinical will, I thought really carefully about what is it actually, and why do we need to have one? Like, what, why is it in all the ethical codes? And I've thought through it. And then since, talking to people, I've heard stories about therapists who didn't have clinical wills, either, colleagues of people I've spoken to or their therapists. And it's really kind of underlined, why it's so important. So I'm on a bit of a mission in a way to sort of spread the word on this particularly through the app, and just
Mhm.
and also to sort of show people that it's not as difficult as they might think it is, and and that particularly in relation to practical, ethical issues that relate to practical aspects, that I'm really interested in how tech can, help us in a way, like reduce the workload. And,
Yeah.
that's what tech at its best does, which in a way leaves us, because these things are really important. They're an important part of how we look after ourselves and our clients, so that we can really focus on, the sort of, as you say, the clinical or relational side of things. But
Mhm.
things like agreements, or where we keep notes, where we keep records,
Mhm.
clinical wills, they're really, really important. And,
Yeah.
there are lots of cases as to why they're important, and we need to pay attention to them.
Mhm. Just going back to therapeutic coaching, actually, and
Yeah.
doing that, you describe it as therapeutic coaching.
I think, having said before that, I always have, and I still do see them as very separate processes. I think there are different ways of thinking about the difference between coaching and therapy. One way you can think about it is in relation to, risk, or how impacted someone is in their life by what's going on for them. I mean, people bring problems into coaching, but they're often um, you know, more to do with kind of feeling like they want to be somewhere else and they want to move forwards. I mean, that applies to people in therapy, but I think people in therapy are often sort of dealing with, something like depression or anxiety, or sort of feeling very stuck. Whereas, people who come into a coaching process are usually very motivated and, ready to kind of move forwards. And that's really kind of one of the big differences that I see
Mhm.
in terms of the two different ways of working. At the same time, people are people, whether they're in therapy or coaching. And coaching clients of mine, they also have their kind of I guess internal obstacles, or the points where they struggle, or feel less confident, or find resistance. And I think when I talk about therapeutic coaching, what I'm really talking about is not doing sort of therapy with those clients, but bringing in a kind of perspective, which is that there might be more going on than meets the eye, or that there might be past experiences that play out in stopping someone from moving forwards, or really kind of realizing their goals, or taking the next step. So I guess it's, when I
Yeah.
talk about that, what I'm saying is, there might be an aspect to your experience that you sort of haven't considered yet, or that it might be worth thinking about, that relates to the thing you want to do, the specific thing you want to do, or the step you want to take, and it's worth just paying attention to that. So I guess what I'm saying is, we can think about that together in the context of a coaching process, without it sort of becoming a therapeutic process, because I think they are very separate. They sort of
Okay.
they're there to do something quite different, but maybe there's some overlap.
And if there is more therapeutic work involved, would you do that as well? Or
So
it,
no, so again, this is about, not just working within your competence. I mean, I'm competent to work as a therapist, but if I'm coaching someone, then I'm their coach. And if we realize that they need some support from a therapist, then that's not going to be me. So at that point, I would help them to find a therapist,
I
either to do
see.
something before we get started, or to take a break from the coaching, or to do it alongside, which I think, a client is able to do those two things separately, because they are quite different.
Mm. So I suppose those two, they complement each other as well. I suppose the therapy and the coaching, they have slightly different energies too, don't
Yeah,
they?
definitely. And if anything, doing both of them in a way, for me, highlights the differences between them. I mean, I work very differently as a coach to the way I work as a therapist. I'm doing different things in a very different way. I see them as completely separate. You know, I mean, there are so many ways I could, explain what the differences are. And I think, doing both helps me really understand how I do one versus the other, and
Mhm.
sort of do one thing rather than the other.
People coming into the profession,
Mhm.
a lot of people listening to this are thinking of coming in, or they're in the training. What advice would you give people?
Um, so many things I could say. Talk to people. I mean, listen to podcasts like this. Read as much as you can. If you're not ready to start a full training, go and do an intro course. Maybe go and do some voluntary work. Feel your way into it. Get a sense of what it's like. And I mean, I don't think it's possible to rush it. So if I say don't rush it, it's inevitable anyway. But take your time with it, and really maybe pay attention to what it's like for you to do it.
Hmm.
I think the thing I've realized is it's not that you're going to just take in a certain amount of information. You're in a way you're there to kind of grow into a role as a therapist, and
Yeah.
that takes personal growth as well, and it doesn't stop. I think that's the other thing I would say is don't expect that
Mm.
to stop. In a way, doing a training is really just the first part of that.
Sure.
And you're going to continue growing as you start doing the work, and
Hmm.
developing as a therapist or counselor, and all that stuff we talked about before, which is sort of sort of finding your own way of doing it. But you kind of you never get to a point where you're like, this is the way I'm going to do this forever. I think you just can continue to kind of grow and develop in that way.
Yeah.
Maybe one more thing I would say is, you go to therapy. There are lots of reasons why people go to therapy, and sometimes they're struggling with something, but you could go to have an experience of therapy, and
Hmm.
you could go to think about why you're interested in this work. And a really good way to explore what it's like to in a way to work as a therapist is to go and get some therapy as a client, because you'll be in
Yeah.
therapy then. You'll be you'll be
Yes, of
you'll be
course.
in a room with a therapist who's
Mm.
doing
Yes,
their
but I
job.
mean, I would have assumed that most people become therapists from having been therapy clients, actually. But of course, there are people that train who've never
Mm.
been therapists. They are just interested in the subject and want to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd done a bit of CBT when I was much younger, but not a
Okay.
long-term psychotherapy. And it was only I mean, I started it ahead of my training, but it was only because I was going to be going into a training and then starting a long-term therapy that I started a long-term therapy. So
Yeah.
the two
Mm.
for me kind of came together.
Yeah. And just the last question, this is a big one, I
Yeah.
suppose, but just general life advice. What are your favorite bits of advice? What would you tell your children? Most important things you've learned?
I think, pay attention, to yourself. I mean, I'm still not there yet, but I pay a lot of attention to what's good for me, what interests me, and I think ultimately, I've got to a point where I know what I think success for me sort of looks and feels like, and my advice would be work out what that is for you.
Right.
You can
Yeah.
do that by yourself, or with some informal support, with formal support in maybe in therapy, or with a coach, and work at that, and be your own guide, I guess, maybe with
Yeah.
some help from others.
Yes. Find out what you love and do that, isn't it? I mean,
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
brilliant.
because you really can.
Mm. But I've said in the past as well, I think for a lot of us going through education systems and stuff, we just have to do what externally pleases others a lot, don't we?
Mm.
So actually come
Mm.
away from any awareness of what people are enjoying. In some ways, what enjoyment feels like in their body. What's
Yeah,
it feel like to love something? How do you know
mm.
whether you love
Yeah,
something?
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
fantastic. Well,
Right,
thank you
thank
so
you.
much for that. I think it's
Thanks.
going to be so interesting for people. I really appreciate it. And hopefully, yes, we can do a part two talking more
Yeah,
particularly about the kind of ethics side of things. And yeah,
great.
we'll speak again soon.
Thanks, John Paul. Take
All right.
care.
You take care. Bye
Enjoy the
bye.
rest of your day. Bye.
You too. Bye.